I
Was it
did. Yeah.
like, okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Yeah, well, that's kind of fun. I feel like for the iPhones, adding the call recording feature that sort of calls out the call recording would be like a handy feature for journalists to
Yeah.
use. I don't know if you use it or if you have used it, but it seems like it would be designed for that use case.
I'll have to ask you about that later because no, I use something that I pay for, which doesn't call it out. But if
Yeah,
it's on the phone, I should use what's on the phone.
there you go, right? And it's brand new, so I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of it. I think it just came out this year, but um, well, I think the main reason I wanted to talk to you today, and for our listeners here, I'm on with Nigel Jaquiss, and he is, of course, with Willamette Week, and I think you still are with Willamette Week, but
No, no,
you're
actually,
officially no longer.
I am officially no longer, after 27 years, I have moved over to the
Wow.
Oregon Journalism Project. I'm still in the same newsroom and still reporting to the same boss, but I actually had to clean my desk after 18 years sitting at the same desk without ever cleaning it off. I have cleaned it off and moved across the room.
Wow, that's was that did that feel like a big deal, even though you still have, as you said, some of the same setup?
It actually did. I mean, it was good for me to clean off my desk, and you wouldn't believe some of the things I found. I mean, like legislative campaign mailers from, more than a decade ago, notes from interviews and conversations that were more than 15 years ago.
Wow.
So psychologically, I think it was a good, clean break, and I needed to do a lot of recycling.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, you have quite a career of coverage. And I would say, and I'm going to put a couple of these links in our show notes, but I would say your beat, so to speak, on the Oregon Journalism Project is similar in the sense that it appears to be focused on politics and sort of things related to politics and government. But it seems to be bigger because before, I think you had said, Ben Bowman and I interviewed you on a different podcast a couple of years ago, and you had said your beat sort of needed to have a Portland connection, whether it's statewide offices that affect Portland or local politics and the issues that affect Portland. Now it seems like you can branch out a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, the whole goal, frankly, is for me to branch out a lot more and to be working on stories around the state. I've done two fairly large stories so far. One was in Central Oregon on the Deschutes River, and one was set on the coast at Astoria. I did a reasonably substantial story last week set in Eugene, and I'm working on a story that's now set in far eastern Oregon and a little bit in southern Oregon. So the whole goal, Reagan, for me now is to work on stories in the other 33 counties, and kind of specifically not to work on stories in Portland or Clackamas County or in Washington County. So, I hope to find stories of statewide significance that will matter to everybody, regardless of what county they're in. But for the first time ever for us and really for Willamette Week, we're trying to focus my activity entirely outside those three metro area counties.
And so, is there somebody new who's sort of picked up those beats? I mean, Sophie Peel is the name we saw a lot during the Fagans related stuff. Is she sort of stepping more into that role?
Yeah, she'll do that. We're hiring right now another reporter for Willamette Week. So we would like to have ideally the same staffing that we had at Willamette Week when I left it. And then our goal for the Oregon Journalism Project, again, same building, different legal entity, different focus, would be to have four reporters also within the year. So right now there's me and there's another fellow named Jim Neff, who just joined us from the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he was the investigations editor. Prior to that, he was the investigations editor at the Seattle Times. So, I've got a lot of experience. He's got a lot more experience than I have. So we're really excited about trying to get to four people in that first year, and we think that we'll be able to do a lot of reporting with four people.
So now, ostensibly, the goal with the journalism project is sort of deeper and broader coverage in all different kinds of areas in Oregon related, I think, primarily to politics and things that intersect with politics. Why are you, or what's the idea behind structuring it the way you guys have, where you've kind of got this sort of the goal is to build a nonprofit entity basically to house all this in. Why is that the format as opposed to a new statewide paper to compete with the Oregonian or some sort of other model that you might go after?
Yeah, great question. So during the pandemic, we, like every other newspaper in America and around the world, I think, really struggled. And that was because our advertising base at Willamette Week was primarily built on advertising from local businesses, a lot of bars and restaurants, and people that depended on foot traffic or customers coming to visit them. No customers, no advertising, no advertising, no Willamette Week. So Mark Zussman, the co-owner and a longtime editor of the paper, he spent a lot of time going hat in hand to people asking for money, which we'd never done before. And that really kept us afloat during the pandemic. And so he I think, realized, hey, it's not only OPB that can ask people for money and get it. We can do that too. So he started asking for support from people saying, look, we would like to expand our newsroom. We would like to cover more of Oregon or all of Oregon, but we can't do it with the staff that we have. It's just too few people and too much territory. And the response that he got was both very positive, but also response that drove us in the direction of forming a nonprofit. So in effect, people said, look, we would love to give you money and give it to you, not pay you for ads, but we would like to give you money. But if we're going to give you substantial money, we would like to get a tax break for it. And Willamette Week is organized as a for-profit corporation. It's never made substantial money, of course, much at all. But the message was clear. If we wanted to expand, we were going to have to come up with a new organization. And so that led to the formation of a 501c3 nonprofit, the Oregon Journalism Project. I think the approach will be very similar. We're hoping to do the kind of watchdog and accountability and investigative reporting that Willamette Week has specialized in since its founding, more than 50 years ago. It's just that legally it is a different entity that will be watchdogging the other 33 counties, different legal entity from the one that people may be used to.
Well, and I think it gets more to a broader point, which is that, your situation right now in advertising revenue for newsrooms in general is not very good. And there's a lot of, different thoughts, I think, among folks about where the blame is. And a lot of the blame gets placed on social media companies. Do you agree with that sort of blame, that sort of the social media companies are to blame for the business woes in the news regimes?
Well, so blame is a loaded word.
Sure.
It's unquestionably the case that the advertising that both conventional daily newspapers like the Oregonian or the Register Guard or the Salem Statesman Journal historically depended on, and the display advertising from local businesses, or even the personal ads that Willamette Week once depended on, all that advertising in its various forms has migrated online because it's much more precisely targeted. If somebody's interested in buying a new car, or somebody's hoping to arrange a date with a member the same or opposite sex, it's much more precise to go online to Match.com or to Carvana and buy or find exactly what you're looking for. The old model of advertising that kept the newspaper industry afloat for more than a century was very imprecise. It was a blunt instrument. You would see the car dealer in whatever town you live in put a big advertising display, in the Sunday paper. Well, most people who get the Sunday paper aren't in the market for a new car, so that's sort of a wasted expense for the car dealer, and it's a waste of time. It's just something for readers to recycle. So I don't want to blame Google and Facebook and other online companies for the demise of the news industry, because the news industry bears a big part of the blame as well. I mean, yes, they took the business, but you know, a lot of newspapers were monopolies, and I think did not adapt, did not foresee the changes that were coming, did not adapt quickly, and so I don't think that it would be accurate to say the industry is a victim. I think it was fat and happy, and didn't think that things were ever going to change, and they changed pretty rapidly, and the news industry was not prepared for that change. So they took it, but we surrendered, and we weren't ready.
Well, and I think you could obviously pre-internet argue that the newspaper sort of served as the internet of the time, and then
Yep,
once the actual internet was invented and became, you know, widespread and affordable, that really hurt the newspaper industry, because they had been the sort of go-to place for information, and now there's other places to get it. So not necessarily being their fault, but innovation really did play a role
yes.
there in terms of making the newspaper less central to everybody's life in that
Absolutely.
way.
So there's a chart that a lot of people have seen. Mike Rogaway at the Oregonian wrote about it recently. I think it was actually developed by by the Oregon Employment Department, and it showed that since the turn of the century, that more than 3/4 of the jobs in journalism in Oregon have disappeared. So that's a vast loss of the people who used to go to school board meetings, city council meetings, county commission meetings, who used to be in the state house, who used to be bird dogging state agencies, who used to be covering the courts, who used to be, you know, watching the police, watching important functions in every town and every county in this state. They're gone now. They don't exist. And so, you know, part of what we're hoping to do in a small way is to try and bring some of that back. You know, some of the men and women who have left the industry. I mean, you can't replace 3/4 of an industry, but you can do something.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So then, I would say kind of two of the top, well, I guess maybe three of the top stories that the Journalism Project has produced, at least from my vantage point, are one sort of about the Oregon Republican Party chair, now former chair, Jerry Cummings, I think it was, and then a big story that you co-wrote with Jeff Manning about the 2020 Labor Day fires and sort of the blame that's being shifted around, and then sort of this beat that you've been on about the Bureau of Labor and Industries and prevailing wage and PLAs and sort of that ongoing debate. Are these kinds of stories, are you finding that they're resonating, that you guys are having the kind of success with these stories that you are hoping to have, or is it still a challenge to get in front of readers?
You know, so one thing that I should talk about is Mark Zussman, who's the founder of the Oregon Journalism Project and a longtime owner and editor of Willamette Week, has gone around the state and talked to editors in towns and in counties where newspapers have either gone away or are still publishing, but eager for more content. So we have, I think, reached arrangements with, I want to say 42, it's 42 plus or minus publications around the state who are our partners. We provide our content to them for free. We give it to them at the same time or earlier as we give it to Willamette Week. So you'll see our stories in small town papers. You'll see them in bigger papers. And so far, I would say that it's really gratifying that many publications want to work with us. And you know, you can never tell. Our responses have been really rewarding, I would say, in terms of the fact that people are definitely reading, they're commenting, they're sending emails to me and to Zussman and to Jeff Manning and to others. So I think the response is there. I mean, I've always said that even as we've watched the industry decline over the past quarter century, people want to know what's going on that affects their lives, and they'll always read a good story. So I think the appetite that people have for news is no less than it's ever been. In fact, it might be more, it might be greater. So I think people are reading the content. I think there's a lot of interest in us producing a lot more content. People want to know what's going on.
One of the things that has come up at the legislature, and I don't know if you've had a chance to review this, but I wrote down Senate Bill 686, and while I pull that up, I think basically briefly, and this is my partner Brian Iverson, who's not able to be here today, but that bill basically comes up with this idea that back to the point that we talked about earlier about maybe the social media companies being to blame, that it requires these online platforms to pay digital journalism providers or donate to the Oregon Civic Information Consortium. Is that a solution you see as necessary or even viable to have sort of a, however you want to frame it, state funding, government funding, taxpayer funding of journalism? Or do you think more of the model that you guys are working on here, which is more philanthropic and sort of reliant on, I would generally say, wealthier folks to kind of, have it in their heart for journalism? Are either of those the answer, or is there some other answer?
I think they both have to be part of the answer. So Senate Bill 686 draws on some previous attempts in California and in Canada and in Australia. So the underlying concept is kind of interesting. If you go online and you're looking for reliable information, let's say you wanted to understand the history of vote by mail, let's say you wanted to know what the Oregon Health Authority's budget is. Now, if you Google those questions, you may get an AI generated answer, which generally, if it's AI generated, will not cite the source that it came from. If you look down below to where the source, where you might get an answer that does attribute the information to a source, there's a good chance it's either going to be attributed to something that was written by a professional reporter, either for a newspaper or a website or a TV or radio station, or it's going to send you to a government document of some kind. And so the concept underlying this Bill 686 is that Google and to a lesser extent Facebook have made an unbelievably large amount of money by drawing on the work that reporters have done at cost to their companies, but that Google and Facebook are not paying for. So they're using my reporting, they're using the reporting of reporters all over the country and all over the world, and they're not paying us for it. And so that's the basic concept. So the bill would call on them to essentially pay into two funds. One would be to compensate newsrooms around the state, and the other would go to this fund at the University of Oregon that would distribute to the very smallest newsrooms around the state. So, it's an interesting idea. It has worked a little bit in other places. I don't know if it's going to pass here. You mentioned government funding. There are alternatives that have been put forward in Oregon and in other places that would say give tax credits to people who subscribe to publications, or provide some kind of tax credit that would support journalism. I'm leery, frankly, of government-supported journalism. I know it exists in many countries. BBC is a great example, but I'm leery of it because a lot of the reporting that we do ends up putting a lens on government, and I'm not sure I like that. I like that concept. But to your larger question, I think it's just imperative that we have professional journalists gathering information in every community that can support journalism, because we need somebody to keep an eye on power, whether it's government power, whether it's private industry, whether it's labor unions. The people who have power need a watchdog, and we also need to know, who's on the school board and what did the city council decide, and is the budget smaller or larger, and why is it smaller or larger? The basic building blocks of democracy are communicated through community journalism. Without a way for the electorate, for the populace to know what's happening, we go back to the dark ages. We live in ignorance, and that's not good for anybody. No matter what your ideology is, you want to have information.
I wanted to kind of ask you sort of your opinion on like what you think actually qualifies maybe as a journalist versus not. So it's sort of my general perception, and I'm trying to remember where I had read about this, but that back in the very early days of US journalism, a lot of the papers were either, started by folks who were politically active or owned and financed by folks who had political agendas. And so typically you'd have papers with a particular point of view, and that sort of the idea of a neutral journalism wasn't there. And then that sort of developed more as you got later into the industrial era and you got sort of into the, I would say like 50s, 60s, 70s, where you had this sort of unbiased, the idea of this like one arbiter or several arbiters. Television news, I think, contributed to that. Is there a role for these, folks or papers or other kinds of journalism that maybe have a little bit of a point of view and are reporting on it, or is it your thought that that doesn't necessarily qualify as journalism?
Well, so let me see if I can walk through that. I think that there is opinion journalism. That's what we see on the op-ed pages of a daily newspaper, where a columnist says, "Here's what I think, and here's why I think it, but it's my opinion."
Mm-hmm.
And then, on the news pages, what I think you should see is a reporter or reporters who go out and gather facts from reputable sources, some official, maybe some unofficial, and they attribute those facts to the sources, whether they're to documents or to on the record sources, or if they're background sources, meaning their names aren't used, they tell you why they couldn't use the names, and they present to you the facts as they found them. So I want to, I guess, draw a small distinction, and
Yeah.
so the idea that Willamette Week has sort of been driven by is that we should go out and gather facts and come back and use those facts to arrive at a point of view, and that we should communicate the point of view to the reader, but that it should be based on attributed facts, attributed quotes, official documents, that it should not be opinion.
Yeah.
Somebody saying my opinion is that your dress is ugly is obviously highly subjective and probably offensive. If you go out and say, well, we talked to 12 people and 11 of them think that your dress is ugly, and they've said that actually, chemically or physically, that it's very difficult for the eye to behold that particular color. That's a terrible analogy, by the way, or a terrible example. But that a point of view is different from an opinion. A point of view is something, I would say, that you arrive at based on your reporting, and an opinion is something that you can have without doing any reporting. Although good columnists, I think, do plenty of reporting. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Oh, I think so, because you kind of see some of these more conservative-leaning news sites that their general position is maybe not always clear. I think sometimes it's just more like they're going to report on things they think that Democrats are doing that go over the line. And then you have sort of the same thing on the other side, where you have some more liberal papers who are mostly going to focus on, the Republicans and what they're doing wrong. And I just didn't know if there's space or value in that, or if that's really just kind of, you see it as more a bit partisan noise that's meant to influence or attempt a certain outcome.
In answer to your question, I think that it's helpful for there to be a variety of views and a variety of points of view. I think where sometimes it becomes confusing or murky to the consumer of news, to the audience, to the reader, is when people are not clear about A, where they're coming from, and B, how they arrived at their point of view. What are you attributing? What facts are you attributing your point of view to? What did your reporting consist of? Who did you speak to? What documents did you review? So I think, look, there's great journalism being done every day by all kinds of reporters when it's done professionally and with integrity. um, it can come from almost anywhere, from the largest, most well-financed organizations to individuals who are writing on their own. I'll give you one example. I think Jeff Eager in Bend, as far as I know, works by himself. He's a lawyer. He's got political experience. I think he was the mayor in Bend. Um, I don't always agree with Jeff, but I always appreciate, he tells you what he knows and how he learned it and what he thinks based on his reporting. So I think he would be an example of a guy who's a one-man shop, but he makes public records requests, he gathers documents, he talks to people. Um, so you don't have to be a large organization to be a reporter, and large organizations, of course, do fall down regularly, as you and I know. But I think there's a lot of space for different kinds of people in the business.
Okay, and I think that makes sense to me in terms of if your process is good, it kind of doesn't matter who you are, or it doesn't always matter who you are, where you came from, and the result you end at, as long as the journalistic process is, as sound as it can be. And I think that makes sense. So you said that journalism can come from a lot of different places. A place that I don't know if you call it journalism, but some writing that appears on newspaper websites now is coming from is AI. There's a story from Willamette Week that sort of lays out, to give them the benefit of the doubt, some limited scenarios, I guess, that the Oregonian is using AI to write some stories, and then they give the AI sort of a byline. What do you think of that, generally?
Well, it makes me nervous. As we discussed earlier in the show, there are diminishingly few jobs left in journalism. I think that I'm no technical expert. I'm no expert on much of anything, but it makes me nervous when you have a machine doing something that may require a lot of different kinds of, I guess, experience, judgment, nuance, and subtlety. The way we communicate with each other relies on all of those things, and I'm just not secure enough in my understanding of artificial intelligence to feel comfortable that that AI is going to be able to view a press release like the ones that the Oregonian used in those AI stories you mentioned, and that it's going to get things right and get them right in the right way. So I don't know. I mean, there are machines doing things today that we never would have imagined 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So I don't want to be a complete Luddite and say it shouldn't happen. It makes me uncomfortable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, for a lot of our listeners, at least, I don't think all of them are Republicans, but we sort of, Brian and I are both Republican staffers and strategists. And so my sort of snide version of this is I would start and say, well, sometimes you have journalists out there that are doing stenography of press releases issued by the government, and there's not a lot of journalism happening there. So why not let computers do that same job, right? But I think the ideal of journalism is you're going to go maybe beyond the press release. You're going to ask, well, why did they send this press release? What did they leave out of this press release? Is there something they didn't send in a press release that should get some attention, right? And I think the general consensus at this point is that AI can't ask those questions without prompting, and can't interview anybody really, I don't think, at this point to answer those questions. And so, maybe AI journalism isn't really journalism. It's sort of more some sort of lower level of drafting or authorship.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happened, I know one of the things that's happened over the past quarter century is that we have seen the balance shift dramatically from people working as reporters who are trained to ask questions and to be skeptical to many of those people going to work for governments as spokespeople or
Yeah.
industry, working for companies, putting out an official version of events or a sanitized version of events or a version of events that leaves out material facts. And so part of the tension in a healthy working democracy is people questioning the official view of things. I mean, we have to question the official view of things because we know history tells us that the official view is very often incomplete. It's sometimes intentionally wrong. And so, to your point, I don't know that AI is capable of having the judgment and experience to say, well, this press release feels like it's totally sanitized or it's completely wrong. The worry that I would have is that it just gets absorbed and regurgitated without a skeptical human being considering the context.
I think that's right. Are there any stories you're working on that we should be paying attention to right now that you think have significant implications, or anything that you're going to be working on here shortly that people should be on the lookout for?
Well, I will continue to work on kind of a central question in my mind, and I think it should be a central question in so many people's minds is, why is this state, from a big picture perspective, that has so many resources, has so many engaged, intelligent people who want the state to be better, why is it faring so poorly in so many important respects? If you look at our educational outcomes, if you look at the provision of mental health services, if you look at our development of housing, we are really, really behind where we should be in all those very important areas. And it's not a lack of money in any of them. There could always be more money, but the money is not the problem as it sometimes has been in the past. So I have been writing, for instance, about the issue of prevailing wage, both in state infrastructure projects, but also in the development of affordable housing and even market rate housing. And we have this tension between the desire to make sure that people are paid fairly for the work they do. That's very important. But also we have this real crisis in almost every community in this state. We don't have enough housing. People are sleeping under bridges. People who sleep under bridges tend to deteriorate pretty rapidly. They get engaged in all kinds of behaviors that are bad for them and bad for their communities. So somehow we have to prioritize here, and the governor, for instance, has said that housing is her highest priority, and then at the same time is allowing the legislature to move even more toward applying prevailing wage law to a wide variety of projects. So I'm trying to get at that tension. We say housing is an emergency situation and it's a crisis, but we're not acting like it. We fund education in the middle of the pack pretty well, actually, and our outcomes are near the very bottom. So I'm looking for that gap. I'm engaged in stories that are trying to examine that gap between what things should be and what they are, and those gaps are pretty large in a lot of areas. So I know that's a general. I know that's a kind of a general answer to a specific question, but we're always looking for stories. I am gratified that pretty much every day somebody either calls me or writes to me with a great idea for a story that kind of fits that gap, the gap story. What is and what should be, and why is there this big gap? So I guess I would appeal to anybody who thinks they've got a story that I ought to take a look at, or a colleague ought to take a look at. I think our job, what we really want to focus on at the Oregon Journalism Project, is holding people accountable. We have a lot of resources in this state, and that includes money. We pay a lot of taxes in this state. We are a high tax, low service state, but it goes far beyond taxation and the provision of government services. There are just a lot of things that could be better. And our goal is to help them get better by shining a light on what's not working and trying to figure out why it's not working and how it could work better.
How should folks with ideas or information about that kind of story reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
N Jaquiss, Jaquiss at OregonJournalismProject.org, or my phone number, 503-957-8612. I can't respond to every story, and some stories I can't do or we can't do, but we always appreciate, the best stories come from people who are engaged in a job or an industry or an endeavor where things aren't working, and they can tell us, hey, it's not working and here's why, and I'll help you find the documents and the sources you need to do the story.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Nigel. I know you've got, as you said, there's not enough journalists and there's too many stories. So we'll let you get back to writing, and maybe hope to have you back on sometime as maybe the campaign season develops or stories develop that are related to upcoming elections. Because I think that's kind of the next segment of that. Obviously, we want to see what gets done in the legislative session, but I think as is often the case, there's a lot of lofty goals and not as much lofty lawmaking that happens. And so the sort of the campaigns will become the next place where people pay attention to what the future of the state may look like. So I'm looking forward to having you back if you'd like to be back.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the work you do. I think the podcast is a great way to reach people around the state, and I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Thanks. You can go to OregonJournalismProject.org to see a lot of the big stories, and then you can also just search for Nigel's name, because some of the bylines appear in different places Willamette Week, and as you said, there's many news outlets that are local and some online only that you guys have distributed your stories to. So be on the lookout for more from the Oregon Journalism Project.